10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Good afternoon, everyone. The Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife will come to order. I want to thank everyone for your patience. We had a long vote series that caused us to move the start time later than I'm sure all of us would like, but we are going to power through now, and we are meeting today to discuss several water and wildlife-related bills. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at the hearing are limited to the chairman and the ranking member or their designees. This allows us to hear from witnesses sooner and keeps members on schedule. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. And hearing no objection, that is so ordered. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the hearing notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Members who are physically present should provide a hard copy for staff to distribute by email. Please note that members are responsible for their own microphones, so as with our fully in-person meetings, those who are joining us online can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform staff immediately so we can help you work those out. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. And today's hearing is focused on opportunities for the subcommittee to advance meaningful policy solutions for managing limited water resources, for promoting innovative water technologies, and for preventing animal abuse. Committee Democrats have worked tirelessly in this Congress to secure historic investments in Western water and to enact meaningful policies. I look forward to continuing that work with this hearing. For example, committee members worked hard to help secure $2.5 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law to fund existing tribal water rights settlements, helping ensure that several tribes can finally access the water that they're legally entitled to. But there's more work to do to fulfill the federal government's trust responsibility to ensure basic water supplies for tribes. And several of the bills on today's agenda will support tribes' access to reliable water resources, as well as the Bureau of Reclamation's programs that help manage those water supplies. The first of these is H.R. 7633, the Hualapai Water Rights Settlement Act of 2022, led by our friend Representative O'Halloran from Arizona. The tribe currently relies on groundwater and has suffered from contamination of that water supply, long-term declines in water levels. H.R. 7633 would authorize and approve the Hualapai tribe's settlement, quantifying the tribe's rights to Colorado River water and funding much-needed water infrastructure. We heard testimony in an early version of this bill last Congress, and today we will consider updated legislation which addresses some of the past concerns raised by the Department of Interior. Also from Representative O'Halloran is H.R. 5880, which would amend the White Mountain Apache tribe's existing water rights settlement to extend certain deadlines and increase overall authorization for the tribe's water system. The White Mountain Apache tribe experiences drinking water shortages every summer, even though Congress approved their water rights settlement more than a decade ago. H.R. 5880 would accommodate unanticipated but necessary design changes to the tribe's planned water system. We'll next consider H.R. 6238, the Water Smart Access for Tribes Act, a bill from our colleague Representative Stansbury of New Mexico. And this bill will authorize the Secretary of Interior to reduce or waive the non-federal cost share for tribes receiving Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart grants. This subcommittee has heard from several tribal representatives that the Water Smart grant program, which includes a matching requirement, presents significant obstacles for tribes who may lack the necessary capital to come up with that match. So H.R. 6238 would allow the Secretary to remove that barrier and support tribes in their efforts to increase drought and climate change resiliency. Next, we'll hear H.R. 7632, the Tribal Access to Clean Water Act, led by Representative Nagoos of Colorado. This bill addresses many shortcomings in the federal government's response to its obligation to ensure that tribes have access to the water they need. H.R. 7632 would establish a new reclamation grant program for tribal clean water projects. Additionally, it would fund technical assistance, helping tribes develop, manage, and protect their water resources. It will also examine a number of other bills under this subcommittee's wildlife jurisdiction, including Representative Levin's H.R. 7612, the Desalination Research Advancement Act. This bill reauthorizes the Bureau of Reclamation's desal and water purification research program, which offers funding for research to help make desalination more affordable and energy efficient. And next, we'll consider H.R. 3081 from Representative Armstrong of North Dakota to make irrigation districts in parts of North Dakota eligible to pay project use power rates for their hydropower administered by the Reclamation Bureau. We'll also consider H.R. 6369 from Representative Rosendale, the Sun River Hydropower Authorization Act. This would authorize Interior to develop hydropower at an existing reclamation project in Montana. And finally, we'll hear H.R. 253, Representative Quigley's Big Cat Public Safety Act, which would end the ownership of big cats and as pets and prohibit exhibitors from allowing public contact with big cats, including cubs. And many of you have seen Tiger King, of course, on Netflix. This series showed us a lot of things, but one of the things it definitely showed us was that there's a dark, dangerous side to keeping lions, tigers, and big cats in captivity. So the Big Cat Public Safety Act is a common sense solution to address public safety and animal abuse concerns. And before I turn it over to the ranking member, I just want to note that I am always happy to include reasonable, thoughtful bills from our Republican friends in these hearings. In fact, I welcome those type of bills and accommodated the request to include Mr. Rosendale's bill today. However, it is my understanding that the minority had requested to add legislation to extend a poison pill provision of the WIN Act in today's hearing, and that is not a credible request and not something we're going to treat as a credible request. Any effort to reauthorize poison pill provisions like that are a bad faith attempt to extend a deeply divisive policy rider. But we will find other ways to keep advancing good ideas on water policy. I also want to address the recent pattern of some of our colleagues going off topic from the jurisdiction of this committee. We are the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Subcommittee. We are not here at any time, and certainly not at this hearing, to talk about gas prices and Putin's price hike or global inflation. We're also not going to talk about the record profits that oil and gas companies are reaping as they profiteer from Ukraine's suffering. This hearing, however, is about the fact that climate change is leading to drought that is so severe that now over 90% of the West is in the middle of a drought this spring. Our constituents need our help to manage their water supplies, and we've got some good bills today that will help meet that need. So I look forward to a productive conversation, and with that, I'll turn it over to the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subcommittee meets today to hear testimony on 8 bills. The majority of the bills before us have a tribal component, 2 of which address current and potential Indian water rights settlements. H.R. 3081 by Mr. Kelly Armstrong of North Dakota would allow some irrigation districts in North Dakota eligible to receive project use power from the federal Pick-Sloan Missouri Basin Program. I ask unanimous consent to offer Mr. Kelly Armstrong's statement for the record on this bill.
Without objection.
And to hearing his perspective, and look forward to hearing his perspective on this. Actually, I look forward to hearing Mr. Carter Vanderwall's perspective on this bill and how this legislation would help his community. Also want to welcome Mr. Erling Jewell, General Manager of the Greenfields Irrigation District in Montana, who will be testifying on a late but necessary addition to the hearing, H.R. 6369. This legislation authorized by Mr. Rosendale will allow for hydropower to be developed at the Bureau of Reclamation's Sun River project. H.R. 5880 by Mr. O'Halloran of Arizona would amend for the 3rd time the White Mountain Apache water rights settlement. This is one of the few settlements passed by the Democrat majority in the 111th Congress that have been revisited due to drafting and implementation errors, as well as cost issues that were predicated by the Obama administration. The bill before us would more than double the original settlement price tag. Also, Mr. O'Halloran is H.R. 7633, which aims to resolve the Hualapai tribe's remaining water right claims in Arizona. This bill has been changed since the last Congress, so I look forward to hearing from the administration on these changes. H.R. 6238 by Ms. Stansberry of New Mexico gives the Interior Department the authority to reduce or waive cost share requirements for tribal governments under Reclamation's Water Smart Program. H.R. 7632 by Mr. Nagoos of Colorado would authorize Reclamation's Rural Water Program until 2032 and provide almost $2 billion in mandatory funding for 3 programs under the Departments of Health and Human Services, Agriculture, and the Interior. H.R. 7612 by Mr. Levin of California authorizes and significantly increases the funding authority for the Bureau of Reclamation's Desalination Research and Development Grant Program. Lastly, the one bill not related to water is H.R. 263, offered by Mr. Quigley of Illinois. The bill would expand the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services authorities under the Lacey Act for regulation and regulating the ownership of big cats. Last year, the service had issues with similar bills that applied to primates, so I look forward to examining the administration's written testimony on this bill. In conclusion, while I understand the majority's wishes to have a hearing on these targeted bills, I would be remiss if I didn't mention another important topic, not only to the West, but to our nation and to the world. What I'm talking about is the increase in food prices exacerbated by the drought and the shocking forecasts of a worldwide food crisis. The drought gripping much of the West is a contributing factor to rising food prices, which have already increased 9% this year. Consumers nationwide depend on food production from irrigated agriculture, including farmers and ranchers in my state of Oregon. When you add supply chain issues, rising energy costs, and the war in Ukraine's impact on wheat production and fertilizer availability, we are looking at a perfect storm of factors that will continue to hammer rural America and the consumers everywhere, and worse yet, increase and perhaps contribute to global hunger, and we hope not, but starvation. Republicans held a Western Drought Forum yesterday to see what can be done in the short and long term to mitigate and resolve these issues. It's my hope that this subcommittee can also look at this issue and work together on a resolution. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
And thank the ranking member. Is Mr. Westerman going to be with us? Okay, he is not. So that, I think, brings us to our first panel, starting with the lead sponsors of the bills on today's agenda. Under committee rules, we ask witnesses to limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but the entire written statement will appear in the hearing record. I don't need to tell the members who are witnesses how to begin and which lights to watch. You all know what to do. But those who are joining us online, we do recommend that you lock the timer on your screen so that you can follow along. After testimony is complete, please do remember to mute yourself for inadvertent background noise. And we will start first with Mr. O'Halloran on his bills, and then we'll go to Ms. Stanbury. Mr. Halloran, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for inviting me to participate in today's important hearing. I also want to thank my friend and colleague from Arizona, the distinguished chairman of the full committee, Chairman Grijalva, for his continued focus on issues within this committee's jurisdiction, like tribal and water issues. I also am happy to see tribal leaders here today and friends. Chairman Nez, I think, will be on screen. Chairman Damon of the Hualapai tribe, or Clark, I'm sorry, of the Hualapai tribe is here today. And Chairman Velasquez from the White Mountain Apache tribe is here today. Water issues are top of the mind for all of us in Arizona and throughout the West. The Colorado River Basin is experiencing the driest conditions in more than 1,200 years. These conditions are not improving, and we are seeing the impacts of these all across the state. Access to reliable, clean water is one of the most important issues that tribal communities in Arizona are facing today. For far too long, previous administrations have slow-tracked the water issues of tribal communities. We took a major step towards remedying that when we passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and a number of provisions that I helped work on with tribal communities were included in the final bill, including $33.5 billion for Indian health services, water and sewer programs, $2.5 billion for Indian water rights settlements, and $5 million for each of the next 5 years for the Indian Reservation Drinking Water Program. The White Mountain Apache Tribe's water settlement legislation would amend the tribe's water rights settlement that was enacted by Congress in 2010 by authorizing the use of additional federal funds and extending the time needed to complete the White Mountain Apache Rural Water System and Minor Flat Dam project. which would create a 160-acre reservoir with storage of 8,600 acre-feet of water. The water treatment plant could process 14.6 million gallons of water a day. The Hualapai tribe, water settlement legislation follows years of negotiations, and I applaud the state parties and the tribe for reaching an agreement today. This settlement will deliver approximately 4,000 acre-feet of water per year to the tribe. It would also establish two fund accounts for a total of $185 million. The Hualapai Water Trust Fund account and the Hualapai Water Settlement Implementation Fund account. These funds will be used for and are for construction, operations, maintenance, technical assistance costs, and other costs associated with the pipeline from the Colorado River. The bill will also ensure the water is delivered to the Grand Canyon Skywalk, a major tourist attraction that is located within the Hualapai community. I also want to note the importance of these bills for water storage and access in Arizona in general. We have seen broad support for these bills as evidenced by the statement submitted before today's hearing by Tom Brzezinski, the Director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. In his testimony, he correctly points out the connection between access to reliable, clean water and economic development. These water settlements will allow for the continued and sustained growth from all the parties concerned, including all the state. One of the lines I want to note from the director's statement goes like this: 11 of the 22 federally recommended Indian tribes in Arizona will have resolved water rights claims. Resolving these claims through settlement is a priority of the state. Settlements avoids the cost and uncertainty of litigation, the claims, and it provides certainty to both tribal and non-tribal water users in the state regarding available water supplies. In fact, it is crucial that these settlements take place. That surety issue is important for appropriate management, both in Arizona and throughout the West. These water settlements also see broad support from groups across Arizona, including the Arizona Department of Water Resources, the Salt River Project, and many other water and agriculture-based organizations that work on these issues every day. Tribal water settlements are absolutely integral to water surety throughout the Southwest. Once again, I commend the committee for today's legislative hearing and their past work and future work. I look forward to continuing to work together to mark up and eventually pass these important settlements in the coming weeks. The time is now, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield.
Thank you, Mr. O'Halloran. We appreciate your hard work on both of these bills. And we will next hear from Representative Stansberry on H.R. 6238.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also to Ranking Member Bentz and to members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunities to present this important legislation today. I am here today to discuss H.R. 6238, which is the Water Smart Access for Tribes Act. But I want to also thank you for hearing other important pieces of tribal water legislation today, including the bill that was just presented and Representative Nagusa's Tribal Access to Clean Water Act, which I am also a proud co-sponsor of. As we know, water is life, water is sacred, and water is essential to everything that we do. And yet, for many of our tribal and indigenous communities, access to water, water infrastructure, and funding needed to build and maintain this infrastructure have remained out of reach. In fact, across the Navajo Nation, and we are so honored to have our President Nez here with us today, it is estimated that 30 to 40% of Diné homes do not have access to running water. Within my own district, the Tohajale chapter, It has lived for years without safe drinking water, having to haul water from miles away for use in homes, public buildings, and even the local senior center. Pueblos across New Mexico also have been without sufficient funding to address water infrastructure needs, including funding for irrigation, drinking water, and other water security needs across our tribal nations. In the year 2022, as the West is facing an unprecedented drought, it is unconscionable that we have not summoned the moral courage and the political will to address these issues. That is why the Water Smart Access for Tribes Act, Representative Nagusa's bill, and the other pieces of legislation we are hearing that advance opportunities for tribal water security are so crucial. Years of underinvestment in tribal water infrastructure have impacted the abilities of our tribes and pueblos to address their water needs. In fact, tribal communities are 19 times more likely to not have access to clean water, and it's estimated that nationwide, almost half of the tribal homes on tribal lands lack access to adequate water or sanitation. But make no mistake, our tribes and pueblos have lived on these lands and on these rivers for countless generations since time immemorial, practicing ways of life and resource stewardship that have resiliently lasted the test of time. But as communities have grown, infrastructure has aged, and drought and water security have intensified, the need to address water security needs has grown ever more acute. Our Water Smart Access for Tribes Act is but one tool to unlock critically needed resources to address water security. For more than a decade, the U.S. Department of the Interior's Water Smart program has provided hundreds of grants to communities across the West as one of our nation's premier water conservation programs. Yet tribes have received fewer than 5% of these grants in spite of the huge need across tribal communities because of burdensome cost-sharing requirements, which have acted as a significant barrier to accessing these funds. That is why the bill I am presenting today authorizes the Secretary of Interior to remove these barriers and unlock millions of dollars that are vitally needed to invest in tribal water projects. This includes projects for addressing drought, water conservation, efficiency, reuse, and recycling. Water is fundamental to the social, economic, and cultural needs of our Indigenous communities. This bipartisan legislation will break down economic barriers to addressing these needs, and coupled with the investments that are in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the budget that we just passed, will unlock millions of dollars to support our tribal communities. In the coming days, I will also be introducing additional bipartisan, bicameral water legislation, including a reauthorization of the Pueblo Indian Irrigation Fund, legislation to improve water security across the entire Rio Grande Basin, and to improve water data and science to address our water needs across the West. The time is now to address these needs, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, once again for your consideration. I am happy to answer any questions you have, and I look forward to working together to address water security across the West. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Stansbury. Before we go to Mr. Quigley, let me ask unanimous consent for Mr. Rosendale to sit on the subcommittee so we can hear from him in a moment about his bill. Seeing no objection, you're in. Okay, let's go to Mr. Quigley. You're recognized for 5 minutes on the Big Cat Protection Act.
I want to thank you all for inviting me today to address you considering H.R. 263, the Big Cat Public Safety Bill. I'm grateful to the committee for holding a hearing. I picked up the mantle on big cats about 3.5 years ago because it was clear that animals like lions, tigers, cougars, and other big cats simply cannot be held in private hands without being a threat to their owners and communities. Right now, an estimated 10 to 20,000 big cats are currently being held in captivity around the U.S. The exact number is unknown because of how many big cats are being held in private hands. The Big Cat Safety Act would amend the Captive Wildlife Safety Act to prohibit the possession of lions, tigers, and other big cat species by individuals who are not licensed by the USDA. It is a very narrowly focused bill on privately owned animals with exemptions for sanctuaries, universities, and zoos. This bill would also restrict direct contact between the public and big cats for the safety of humans and animals alike, particularly through cub petting and photo opportunities, which fuel a cycle of breeding and dumping cubs when they outgrow their usefulness. Some states have banned private ownership of big cats already, but this problem requires a federal solution that will protect communities, law enforcement, and animals alike. Some believe that private ownership and familiarity with these animals will support large conservation goals for these species worldwide. However, the rampant exotic pet trade in big cats diminishes U.S. credibility in conservation efforts abroad. Domestic issues with private ownership of big cats has hamstrung international efforts by the State Department to end cruel tiger farming globally. The Big Cat Safety Act has been endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police, the National Sheriff's Association, and numerous state and local law enforcement agencies. Because 500-pound carnivores pose a serious and very real threat to first responders, law enforcement officers, and entire communities around the country. Thank you to Sheriff Lutz for being here today to speak to the urgent need to establish this federal policy and for providing his expertise on the matter. This bill is also endorsed by the Humane Society of the U.S. and countless other animal welfare organizations. Because lions and tigers do not belong in urban apartments or in cages in suburban backyards. And because private citizens simply do not have the resources to care for dangerous animals that are meant to roam over hundreds of square miles. The bill is supported by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums and not opposed by the Zoological Association of America, the Trade Association for Small Roadside Type Zoos. Because ripping newborn cubs from their mothers moments after their birth to use as props in photos is already cruel enough. But then, once they become too big to be safely held, brutally killing them is simply wrong. More than 67,000 Americans have signed a change.org petition calling for the immediate passage of this bill because the public knows how exploitive, dangerous, and inhumane this tiny so-called industry truly is. What Americans do know is that they are helping shoulder the cost of monitoring and regulating big cat private ownership. When big cats are rescued from horrific conditions or simply abandoned by overwhelmed owners, the American taxpayers pay for the care and feeding of these cats. On behalf of myself and the 256 co-sponsors of this bill, thank you for your time and for holding this hearing today, and I'm hopeful this bill can earn swift passage through the committee. Last Congress, this bill passed the House of Representatives with a vote of 272 to 114. This bill must pass the Congress this year to ensure these exotic animals are no longer endangering themselves and the safety of our communities. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Quigley. And now we will hear from Representative Rosendale on his bill, H.R. 6369. Mr. Rosendale, unless you object, I'm going to recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on my bill, H.R. 6369, the Sun River Hydropower Authorization Act. This bipartisan and common sense legislation would enable the Bureau of Reclamation to work with the Gibson Dam in northwestern Montana to generate hydropower from existing infrastructure. The Sun River Hydropower Authorization Act has widespread support from the Irrigation District, electric co-ops, state legislators, and county commissioners. And it has the full support of the entire Montana delegation, with Senator Daines and Tester leading an identical bill in the upper chamber. When it was initially designed and constructed in the 1920s, it included hydropower penstocks to facilitate future generation. Over the past several decades, Greenfields Irrigation District has partnered with private developers and received several licenses from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to develop hydropower on the Gibson Dam. However, construction still has not begun. H.R. 6369 would amend the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation project authorization of the Sun River project to include hydropower generation. allowing Greenfields Irrigation District to finally bring this hydropower generation project to completion. This measure is a win-win for all parties involved. The Greenfields Irrigation District will finally be able to harness the benefits of hydropower generation, financially supporting the irrigation district and unlocking access to clean energy. Passage of the Sun River Hydropower Authorization Act would produce a projected 54,000 megawatt hours annually, enough to reliably power 5,000 to 7,500 homes in central Montana with clean, zero-emission energy. And it does this while full protecting the rights of irrigators and even assures their access to a stable water source for years to come by creating a reliable new revenue stream to maintain the vital infrastructure. My bill will promote a clean, renewable, and reliable energy source. It will support local irrigators, and it will bring jobs and economic benefits to the local community. I'll keep my testimony short since I know there's a lot to get to today, and I'm sure Mr. Earling will do an excellent job covering all the more intricate details of this project. But once again, emphasize the resounding support for this bill within the local community, within the state, and within our entire congressional delegation. I hope we can come together to support a truly bipartisan win for the environment, the energy sector, and for Montana. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. We'll now ask our second panel to come forward. And I want to thank all the members who did join us today to tell us about their bills. As the second panel takes its seat, let me remind witnesses that under committee rules, you are to limit your oral statements to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will, of course, appear in the hearing record. When you begin speaking, the timer will start counting down. It'll turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. And again, for those joining us remotely, it's a good idea to pin or lock the timer so that it remains visible. And for our non-administration witnesses, we also encourage you to participate in the Witness Diversity Survey that has been created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Witnesses should refer to their hearing invitation materials for further information about that. When your testimony is complete, please do remember to mute yourself, and I will ask the entire panel to finish its testimony before we bring it back to the members for questions. So we'll begin by hearing from Dr. David Raff, Chief Engineer with the Bureau of Reclamation. Dr. Raff, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon. Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and members of the subcommittee. I'm David Raff, Chief Engineer for the Bureau of Reclamation within the Department of the Interior. It is a pleasure to be back in front of this subcommittee to provide Interior's views on this legislation. The committee has my written statement, so I will use my time to address a few key points. Adequate and safe water supplies are fundamental to the health, economy, and security of the country. Climate change, drought, increased populations, aging infrastructure, wildfires, and environmental requirements all strain existing water and hydropower resources. Looking out the window of my home in Representative Nagusa's district here in Louisville, Colorado, hundreds of my friends and neighbors lost their homes in the Marshall wildfire just a few months ago. These are serious times with serious challenges. For the past 120 years, the Bureau of Reclamation has delivered water and power to the Western United States, and we will rise to these new and contemporary challenges. Regarding the Water Smart Access for Tribes Act, through its Water Smart program, Reclamation seeks to address the water challenges of the West by investing in activities that expand and stretch limited water supplies to meet the growing needs of expanding municipalities, domestic energy development, the environment, and agriculture. The Water Smart Access for Tribes Act would give the Secretary of the Interior the authority to waive or reduce the cost share requirements under the Water Smart program in instances where a tribe does not have sufficient funds to pay the cost share. Reclamation has existing analogous cost share waiver processes focused on financial hardship. We believe that this legislation would assist tribes applying for Water Smart grants. We would like to continue to work with the committee and bill sponsors on minor technical corrections and support the sponsors' work to assist tribes applying for Water Smart grants. The Tribal Access to Clean Water Act of 2022 would help fund water infrastructure projects in tribal communities and provide clean water to Native American households who currently lack access. The bill would also provide $90 million for Reclamation's Native American Affairs Technical Assistance Program. This program provides technical assistance to Indian tribes to develop, manage, and protect their water and related resources. In addition, the bill would reauthorize the Rural Water Supply Act of 2006 and provide $1 billion in mandatory appropriations for a competitive grant program for tribal clean water access projects. Indian tribes would be eligible to compete under this new grant program, which would fully cover the cost to plan, design, and construct a project approved by the Secretary of the Interior. The department supports the intent of this legislation and would work with our partner agencies to prioritize funding of projects under the competitive grant program. On the Desalination Research Advancement Act, desalination is a technology that we look to as one method to mitigate impacts of drought in the Western United States. Reclamation's Desalination and Water Purification Program funds the development of climate-resilient, water treatment-based solutions for water supply augmentation by providing financial assistance for water treatment research and for the construction of desalination plants. Developing more cost-effective and low-impact treatment technologies bolsters the ability of Reclamation, its customer stakeholders, tribal and rural communities to cope with stresses of climate change, including drought. The department supports the goal of advancing desalination research and is willing to work with the sponsor and subcommittee on any technical changes that might be required. And with regard to HR 3081, project use power is the electrical capacity required to operate and maintain reclamation facilities. Power revenues cover annual operating expenses, a reserve for replacement of facilities, and funds to repay project construction costs marketed through the Western Area Power Administration and the Rural Electric Cooperatives. HR 3081 would make certain non-reclamation project districts in North Dakota eligible to receive project use power. If this bill were to pass, this additional requirement may limit the amount of power surplus available to power customers, which could result in a rate increase to sufficiently meet statutory requirements for cost recovery. Nevertheless, if Congress determines to extend the benefit of project use power to the North Dakota districts, Reclamation will implement its provisions and seek to integrate with existing program power demands. Thank you for the opportunity to share the views of the department on these 4 bills. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Rath. The subcommittee will next hear from the Honorable Dr. Damon Clark, Chairman of the Hualapai Tribe. The chair recognizes Chairman Clark for 5 minutes. Welcome to the subcommittee, sir.
Thank you, sir. My name is Chairman Huffman, Damon R. Clark. And ranking members, want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and members of the subcommittee. You know, the Clean Water Act has been part of our resources of being sustainable. You know, on the Hualapai, we've had E. coli there on our wells, and we needed to get that pretty much done. The access to reliable, clean, and drinkable water is a need, especially for human. And in the Hualapai, as well as other Native American communities, it is off the reservation. I mean, we are off the reservation, and it is hard to get clean water sustainable in our areas because we are in a rural community. In the rural community, we are 50 miles away from the nearest area, which is Kingman, Arizona, and or Flagstaff, which is another hour and a half away. So we need to get these to our communities. In other areas, such as Navajo, they are, you know, miles and miles away from clean water. Some of the areas there, I've worked out there, and some of the communities do not have access to water. They have to drive 20 miles, 30 miles to get water, and then on the way home, you know, the roads are so bad, it takes them hours to get to back home. COVID-19 has disappropriated Native American communities with multiple factors, including economic disadvantages, the lack of public health infrastructure, and again, just access to water. In our community, we had to take about 3-4 days to get water to our members of the community. And even with that, we still are trucking water to different locales as we speak today. The advantages in technology, treatment, sensors are all part of this. We need that support, and I support this 100%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We'll next hear from the Honorable Casey Velasquez, Chairman of the White Mountain Apache Tribe. Chairman Velasquez, welcome to the subcommittee. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 5880, a bill to amend the White Mountain Apache Tribe Water Rights Quantification Act of 2010. I also want to thank Representative O'Halloran for championing this critical legislation. My name is Casey Velasquez, Chairman of the White Mountain Apache Tribe. We live on the Fort Apache Indian Reservation located in the White Mountains of Arizona. The headwaters and tributaries of the Salt River arises on our reservation and are the principal sources of water for the tribe in the greater metropolitan Phoenix area. The tribe's current water sources and infrastructure have been and continue to be grossly inadequate to meet the current demands and needs of our reservation communities. We are in urgent need of a long-term solution for our drinking water needs. Currently, the tribe is served by the Minor Flat well field, but well production has fallen sharply and is in irreversible decline. To make matters worse, the tribe's experienced drinking water shortages and the quality of existing water sources threatens the health of our people. Here's a picture of groundwater from Carrizo with high concentration of manganese. The only viable solution is the replacement of failing groundwater resources with surface water from the North Fork of the White River. Fortunately, in 2010, Congress enacted the White Mountain Apache Tribe Water Rights Quantification Act, which confirmed and authorized the tribe's water settlement with the federal government and Arizona state parties. After decades of litigation, the cornerstone of that act is authorization for the design and the construction of the tribe's rural water system, which will provide long-term and reliable water supply for current and future generations. Recognizing the importance of the act in the rural water system, Congress has previously approved 2 amendments to the act to address cost overruns and resulting delays in the required environmental review. Since the passage of the amendments, we have learned that the cost for the rural water systems will exceed the cost authorized in the underlying act, even when factoring in the additional flexibility to use previously authorized water-related economic development funds for the project. The associated engineer issues have also delayed the environmental review, thus requiring the need to extend the enforceability date by 2 years. As the work on the design and geotechnical study of the proposed dam site for the rural water system has taken place, the tribe, together with the Reclamation and its consultants, have identified additional cost overruns beyond what was initially contemplated. In 2019, the tribe worked with the Reclamation on a drilling program to further define the site characteristics and to prepare the viability assessment of the Minor Flat Dam, a key component of the rural water system. In the course of this work, the tribe's consultant engineers altered the design to address seepage and stability issues at the dam site, which resulted in an increased cost estimate for the project. In October 2021, the engineer of records finalized a viability assessment finding the dam viable. We continue to work closely with the Reclamation and believe we are close to reaching consensus on a number that would address the design issues so that the rural water system can be built and the settlement finalized. If this issue is not resolved, the completion of the rural waters project will be threatened, thereby increasing the ultimate cost to the tribe and to the United States and delaying delivery of the life-sustaining drinking water to our reservation communities. Consequently, the tribe is seeking a final amendment to increase the federal funds authorized to complete the rural water system project to address cost overruns and extend the enforceability date to April 30, 2025 to allow sufficient time for the environmental review associated with the project to be completed. Thank you again very much for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will next hear from President Nez. President Nez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee for Water, Oceans, and Wildlife. My name is Jonathan Nez. I am the President of the Navajo Nation. I would like to begin my remarks by thanking you for the opportunity to speak about two important bills that are being reviewed by your committee. H.R. 6238, the Water Smart Access for Tribes Act, and H.R. 7632, the Tribal Access to Clean Water Act. I too would also like to thank Representative Stansberry and Nagoos for introducing these two bills that have great potential to help the Navajo people and others in Indian country. Appreciate my good friend Representative O'Halloran on his statement and his advocacy. The Navajo Nation is the largest Native American tribe in the United States with over 27,000 square miles of land and more than 400,000 tribal citizens, roughly half of whom reside on Navajo land. Unfortunately, we have not always had the resources to ensure a healthy and happy future for our people. Facts that have always been true, but that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and by a historic drought in the American Southwest that the Navajo people call home. Native American households are 19 times more likely than white households to lack access to clean drinking water through indoor plumbing. This is one of the great inequities of our time, which manifests itself in public health impacts, including the highest hospitalization and death rates from COVID-19 of any ethnic group, as well as economic impacts. Thousands of homes on the Navajo Nation do not have access to running water. Those families must haul water from filling stations around the nation to meet their basic needs. An estimated 67 times more for water that they haul, and then it would cost if delivered via a municipal water system. Believe it or not, my family still hauls water today. Regarding H.R. 6238, Water Smart Access for Tribes Act, one program that has been useful in bringing water to the Navajo people is the Water Smart Grant Program. In the past few days, we were awarded funding under the Water Smart program for 2 drought resiliency projects in Ojeto, Utah, and Cameron, Arizona. These projects will provide clean water access to hundreds of Navajo families. We would have applied for more Water Smart funding opportunities, but the current grant program requires tribes to provide a non-federal cost share match for federal funding. Because of this unique laws governing tribes, the Navajo Nation does not have a traditional tax base like states and municipalities, and raising revenue through other means is difficult. Less than 5% of the projects funded under Water Smart since 2010 have been led by tribes, largely because of the matching funds requirement. The Water Smart Access for Tribes Act, H.R. 6238, would allow those matching funds to be waived for tribes, making the program more accessible to those who need it most. Regarding H.R. 7632, the Tribal Access to Clean Water Act. Another area of critical importance to meeting the water needs of tribes is support for the appropriate operation and maintenance of water projects, as well as tribal capacity development to plan, design, construct and operate these systems. If O&M support is insufficient, water infrastructure will deteriorate at a faster pace, increasing overall costs. Tribal water systems present unique challenges such as managing high capital and operating costs in remote locations and finding and retaining qualified water system operators. IHS has been authorized to provide O&M assistance since the 1950s, but this authority has never been funded. There is also a dire need for technical assistance to allow tribes to navigate a complex array of federal programs and assume leadership roles in solving the water access gap. Grant writing and assistance, engineering, evaluation, and design of water infrastructure system, and training of certified operators are all critical for ensuring that the infrastructure funding is utilized expeditiously and appropriately. IHS and the Bureau of Reclamation both have technical assistance programs that currently are underfunded. The Tribal Access to Clean Water Act helps meet both of these needs by providing critical funding for both O&M costs as well as technical assistance to tribes. In conclusion, I encourage the committee to support both of the bills I have discussed, as they would make a significant improvement to health and well-being of tribal communities across the country. I look forward to answering any questions you may have. And thank you.
Thank you, President Nez. We will now bring it back to the members for questions, and I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. I'd like to start with Chairman Clark from the Hualapai Tribe. And Mr. Chairman, the bill before us today has been changed from previous legislation we've considered in this subcommittee. I wonder if you could elaborate on the changes that have been made since you were with us in 2019, and how these changes address some of the concerns that were raised back at that time, please.
On our bill that we're looking at, the changes made was the tribe and the United States to object to off-reservation pumping in certain specific design circumstances that could impair the on-reservation groundwater resource. Additionally, previous legislation would have ratified a project-based settlement. This HR 7633 instead would ratify a fund-based settlement, and this change in approach was made by the request of the Interior Department and is supported by the tribe.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for Chairman Velasquez, HR 5880 would increase the amount authorized for your tribe's water rights settlement due to stability issues at the proposed dam site for your water project. I wonder if you could just explain why changes to the project are necessary and how that has led to some additional costs that were not anticipated when your settlement was first authorized over a decade ago.
Thank you. The tribe and the reservation residents are in desperate need of a long-term solution for their drinking water needs, sir. Drinking water shortages are chronic, especially in the summer. The WMAT rural water system is the only viable solution to address these basic human needs. The White Mountain Apache Tribes Quantification Act and the underlying settlement agreement with the federal and state parties, it's crucial that we be involved in the processes and get the water for the White Mountain Apache Tribe. Thank you.
All right, and Mr. Chairman, you've talked about the urgency of passing this legislation. What are some of the consequences of not passing this bill in a timely manner?
The consequences, sir, there's several. Number one is we need to get it will hurt the White Mountain Apache Tribe, the state of Arizona, and the federal government. It's important. Our people need water. It's essential. As we look over here, Chairman, the bottle of that water, it's not drinkable. The last thing I really want to address is that the tribe is looking forward to settle this once and for all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I'll go to Dr. Raff, please. Dr. Raff, HR 7632 would provide $90 million for Reclamation to provide technical support for tribal water rights settlements and tribal water management. This is a significant investment in a program that just a few years ago received just $2 to $3 million annually. So could you speak to how this additional funding would be useful in supporting clean water access in tribal communities?
Yeah, thank you. So historically, the Native American Affairs Technical Assistance Program, which does provide federal funds to tribes to help support their management of their water, has been limited to approximately $200,000 per project. Certainly increasing the amount of money available for that program would allow us to increase the amount available per project on an annual basis as well. As you mentioned, historically, the program has been funded on the order of $23 million annually. In fiscal year 22, however, we were able to ramp up support to $25 million for that program, and certainly see the need, as we've heard here, from this panel, that there is plenty of project base out there that additional funding would help us allocate.
Thanks, Dr. Raff. Sorry we don't have a great connection, but I think we heard most of what you wanted us to hear. So I will yield back and recognize Ms. Gonzalez-Colon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got some questions that were left by Mr. Ranking Member Benz. I will commence by that and then make my own. My first question will be to Dr. Raft. With the late edition of HR 6369, we understand that the administration did not have enough time to draft a testimony for today. Can your agency submit for the record its views on the legislation within 10 business days?
Yeah, absolutely. We will work to respond to the committee.
Thank you. Next question will be to Dr. Clark. I want to say thank you for your testimony on the tribal settlement, which will spend around $180 million in taxpayers' funding. Unfortunately, the administration failed to provide a witness who could testify on this bill and answer questions about the claims being settled. I understand from your perspective on why these bills help the tribe with water certainty, but taxpayers in Oregon and elsewhere are being asked to pay for much of the settlement. One of the things we have to weigh here is whether this is a net benefit to the American taxpayer, but we are unfortunately able to ask the federal government this question in this hearing. What is your response as to what constituents and others outside Arizona are getting from this settlement?
Well, thank you for that question. You know, passage of this legislation is essential for our tribe and to secure funding and secure jobs. We've done everything possible to provide jobs and income not only to our people, but people in Arizona, Mojave County, down to Bullhead, Kingman, Lake Havasu, Peach Springs, throughout the country. When we have jobs available to those people, they pay taxes back. And the taxes that are paid back go back to the government. They go back to the federal government. And with that in mind, we had a study done by Professor Colt. And he provided that study to show that this bill and this water settlement will give back to the economy of the United States. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. Dr. Raff, some of the bills we're considering today deal with the Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart grants. So I wanted just to briefly discuss the program. As you know, the Water Smart program includes cost-shared grants to support water conservation and water management improvements, including to fund water efficiency projects, drought resiliency projects, and watershed management projects as well, among many others. Originally, the Water Smart grants were only available to eligible applicants in the 17 western states and 4 small U.S. territories. Those were American Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. However, last Congress, we expanded the eligibility to include all the non-continuous states and territories, and in 2019, the bipartisan lands package extended eligibility to Alaska and Hawaii. And in December of 2020, the Omnibus incorporated legislation I introduced to make Puerto Rico eligible for these grants as well. I therefore wanted to take this opportunity to encourage Reclamation to proactively engage with and conduct outreach about water smart grants in Puerto Rico and across the rest of the non-continuous states and territories. While I recognize the Bureau of Reclamation's work is mainly focused on addressing water needs in the American West, it is also important that we acknowledge and tackle the water challenges we face in the non-continuous jurisdictions. This includes the vulnerability to droughts in ways that differ from the mainland. In fact, as we speak, over 66% of Puerto Rico is under abnormally dry conditions. And water smart grants can offer needed resources to address and mitigate some of these water supply issues. And that's why it is critical that the Reclamation have a plan or strategy to place increased awareness about these funding opportunities in the non-continuous states. And that's why I just wanted to take this opportunity to discuss that topic. And with that, Dr. Raff, would you like, I know my time expired, but later on to comment on these issues and how we can work this out. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez-Colon. Mr. Rapp, did you want a brief response?
Yes, and apologies if the audio is still bad.
It's better now.
Okay, great. I will say that we are working very hard to increase our outreach under the Water Smart program within the non-contiguous Western United States. Just in the past couple of months, one of our Water Smart members traveled to Alaska to speak about Water Smart activities. I myself, along with another staff member, traveled to speak to a variety of territories, and we will certainly be looking to do additional outreach to Puerto Rico and others. So your message is heard loud and clear.
All right, thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Soto for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this hearing today. I wanted to focus my comments on the Big Cat Safety Act. Really excited to see this important piece of legislation moving through the process. We're really proud to have the Central Florida Animal Reserve in Osceola County in Florida's 9th Congressional District. It is a refuge for big cats who were abandoned or their owners couldn't take care of them anymore. Throughout Florida, as you could tell with the weather there, as well as in California as well, you have a lot of folks doing that. And then those cats are left in a tough spot, as are the owners. This is about public safety, and it's also about recognizing the majestic nature of our lions and tigers and Florida panthers and others. I was really pleased to be able to go on that trip with Simba, who is the local gentleman who runs this amazing facility. And two things that I wanted to bring up briefly as we're going through this is first, that we look forward to continuing to work with the bill sponsor, Mr. Quigley, and others on defining employees versus volunteers for purposes of training and the direct contact experience, which volunteers certainly shouldn't have, and how far the setback would be for permanent barriers. Right now it's 15 feet, which is actually pretty far. And when I was there, we were 6-8 feet far away, and we were nowhere near these cats. And so I think we could probably work on that a little bit. But the main crux of this bill is critical, which is we can't just have anybody in the United States have a giant tiger or lion in their backyard and let it just get out into the public and put people and their lives at risk. Our law enforcement aren't trained for these things, and it takes a while for Florida Fish and Wildlife or others to get there. And we all saw through a series during the midst of the pandemic with Tiger King that now America's very awake to the fact that this is not as regulated as much as you would think in the United States, and how Congress needs to step up to do this in a fair way to protect these majestic giant cats which are endangered all over the world, and balance that with public safety and help with the amazing work that these local facilities like Central Florida Animal Reserve is doing for so many big cats in Central Florida. With that, I'm glad to support this legislation going forward, and Chairman, I appreciate the time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soto. Let me thank everyone on the second panel for your testimony. We will now hear from our third and final panel of witnesses. And as those witnesses get ready to join us, I will just remind them, everyone needs to mute themselves when you're not speaking to avoid inadvertent background noise. And we'll allow all of you on this panel to testify before we bring it back to the members for questions. So we will first hear from Ms. Sandy Curl, the General Manager of the San Diego County Water Authority. I'm told that Ms. Curl is going to join us, and I'll recognize you for 5 minutes, but that you will not be available for questions because you have a commitment. So we understand and we appreciate you joining us. You're recognized.
Thank you so much, Chairman Huffman. Before I begin my testimony today, I want to specifically thank Congressman Levin for his steadfast support of the Water Authority in our region. To you, Chairman Huffman and Ranking Member Bentz, and to the rest of the members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing to discuss desalination in our region and to support H.R. 7612, the Desalination Research Advancement Act. Again, my name is Sandy Curl. I'm the General Manager of the San Diego County Water Authority. Our agency was created in 1944 and is responsible for providing wholesale water supplies to 24 retail member agencies who serve 3.3 million San Diego County residents and support a $240 billion regional economy. I would note for the committee that 9 of the county's 18 incorporated cities and 15 of the county's 30 unincorporated community planning areas are considered disadvantaged communities. This makes our mission at the Water Authority all that much more critical. I have been with the Water Authority since 2009 and was formally appointed General Manager by the Board of Directors in November of 2019. And surprising to me, the first crisis that I was tasked with addressing in this role had nothing to do with water. It's just months after being appointed, the nation was brought to a standstill by the COVID pandemic. And I needed to create a safe working environment for our 250 employees while ensuring our member agencies had the resources they needed to supply clean water to our residents. Fortunately, we were able to construct a plan to keep our employees safe and our facilities delivering water to the region. This was also a time when our state and the entire West was enveloped in a historic drought, which still persists today. The semi-arid San Diego region has very little natural resources. In 1946 was the last time the region had sufficient local supplies of water to meet the demand. For more than 70 years, the San Diego County Water Authority had imported water to meet the San Diego region's needs through times of drought, economic expansion, and population growth. The county has relied on the Colorado River water since 1946. The San Diego region secured its own highly reliable conserved Colorado River supplies with the historic Quantification settlement agreement in 2003. These locally controlled supplies include a water conservation and transfer agreement with the Imperial Irrigation District and water conserved by lining long stretches of the All-American and Coachella canals. The county also receives some imported water from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Bay Delta via the State Water Project, Water from the Bay Delta is a critical resource, and San Diego continues to reduce reliance on it, consistent with state law. In fact, we have not taken any water from the Bay Delta since July of 21. The authority and its member agencies have made significant investments in local water supplies to include surface storage, groundwater, water recycling, and potable reuse, and of course, seawater desalination. These investments in a diverse local water supply are why we, as a region, have been able to keep the faucets running in our service area even during this historic drought. This is in large part due to our embarking on a public-private partnership to develop the largest ocean desalination plant in the nation. And this is the Claude Bud Lewis Carlsbad Desalination Plant. The facility currently delivers approximately 56,000 acre-feet per year, or 50 million gallons per day of fresh, clean water for consumption by our residents. With targeted investments, this facility has the capacity to deliver water upwards of 10% of the demand in the region. The project and our decades-long conservation efforts are major factors in why we continue to have reliable water supplies for our ratepayers, even in the midst of this historic drought. Desalination has been instrumental in terms of diversifying our water portfolio to protect our residents in times of drought. The public-private partnership model allowed us to construct this facility without federal taxpayer dollars. HR 7612, Desalination Research Advancement Act. Congressman Mike Levin has been a longtime supporter of our Carlsbad desalination plant and efforts to utilize desalination technology across the country. That is why I am proud to testify here today in support of HR 7612, the Desalination Research Advancement Act. This legislation amends the Water Desalination Act of 1996, which is enacted into law to authorize the Secretary of the Interior to award grants to conduct, encourage, and assist in research and development of desalination technologies. The historic law also directed the Secretary to administer demonstration and development programs to address technical design and construction to assess potential marketability of byproducts of desalination and to assess the financial feasibility to developing desalination plants. It is safe to say that we may not have our desalination plant today if not for Congress passing this law in 1996. Congressman Levin's legislation aims to support these efforts by increasing the current authorization for desalination research and development from $5 million per year to $20 million per year. This legislation also increases the annual
Ms.
award cap.
Kurleman, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We are over time, and so let me just invite you to submit, well, you already have submitted your full written statement. That will go into the record, and we're going to have to move along. But I do want to thank you. I understand that you have to leave and can't join us for questions, but before you do that, let me just tell you that I often point to you and your colleagues at the San Diego Water Authority as sort of the poster child of how to diversify water supply portfolios and become more resilient. You've really done some pioneering things in San Diego, not just on desal, but on that whole spectrum of strategies and tools for water management. So I commend you for that, and we thank you for joining us. Thank you. So we will now hear from Mr. Matt Lutz, who is the Sheriff of Muskingum County, Ohio. Welcome, Sheriff Lutz.
Chairman Huffman, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you great. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good evening. Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony concerning the Big Cat Public Safety Act, H.R. 263. I'm the Sheriff of Muskingum County, Ohio, and I have served in this role for 14 years with a total of 33 years in law enforcement, in addition to decades as a volunteer firefighter. I oversee and serve alongside a team of more than 100 fellow law enforcement officers to protect one of the largest counties in our state. I have firsthand experience with the dangers of captive big cats, the very dangers that H.R. 263 aims to address. In late 2011, an exotic animal collector released more than 50 exotic animals, including 38 tigers, lions, and cougars that he had been keeping on his property in Zanesville, Ohio. When terrified neighbors began to see big cats, bears, and other non-native species running loose near their properties, they turned to my office. In order to protect our community, we had to make the difficult decision to shoot the animals before they could harm or kill anyone. This decision, although the right one, brought major adversity to my office, my officers, and my community. This shocking incident placed a heavy burden on our deputies and the office as a whole, inflicting trauma among first responders, some of whom needed quite some time to cope with the experience. When faced with iconic animals that they would never want to harm, they were forced to think about the potential consequences of deadly animals getting further into our community, including the imminent danger to children playing a soccer game just down the road. My deputies had to act swiftly under unimaginable circumstances, putting down most of the animals and risking their lives to do so. In addition to the human cost, this crisis placed a significant resource burden on our public safety resources. In the course of just 2 days, my office incurred thousands of dollars in overtime and related expenses while responding to this single incident. Indeed, pet big cat collectors are able to externalize the risk created by irresponsible ownership, leaving taxpayers to bear the cost when big cats escape or otherwise jeopardize the public. I want to stress that the outcome in this case could have been exponentially worse. It is miraculous that there were no loss of human life or serious injury that day. The outcome could have been much worse if any single condition had been just slightly different, and it could be far worse the next time. Fortunately, enacting H.R. 263 can help to ensure that there is no next time. In fact, if the Big Cat Public Safety Act had been in place, the exotic animal collector in Zanesville would not have been allowed to acquire and keep these deadly big cats in his backyard. And my office and my community would not have had to rely on luck to avoid the loss of life. In addition to escapes and attacks, the mere presence of dangerous big cats can make it substantially more difficult to respond to emergencies. If first responders are called to address a crime, medical emergency, or fire, unexpectedly encountering a dangerous big cat puts the responders in harm's way and makes it more difficult to manage an already risky circumstance. First responders should not be expected to add the risk of encountering deadly wild animals, which could be eliminated through proper legislative action, to the list of dangers inherent to their roles. The Big Cat Public Safety Act represents a critical opportunity to protect first responders as well as public and the animals themselves. H.R. 263 will prohibit individuals from keeping tigers, lions, and other big cats as pets and limit dangerous direct contact between the wild animals and the members of the public while exempting USDA licensed exhibitors. After the exotic release in my community, the Ohio legislature took action to restrict private ownership within the state. But across the nation, exotic pet laws comprise a confusing patchwork. Trying to safeguard the public from unpredictable wild felines exclusively through state and local action ignores the very nature of these dangerous species and their interstate trade. Accordingly, a federal solution in the form of H.R. 263 is essential to protect communities across the U.S. We cannot stand by waiting for the next dangerous big cat crisis. It's time to take a stand for first responders and community safety. And Congress has the opportunity to do just that by enacting the Big Cat Public Safety Act. The National Sheriff's Association has endorsed the measure, as have countless individual first responders, animal care agencies, and rescuers across the U.S. I hope the subcommittee will join them in supporting this long overdue public safety measure. I respectfully ask the subcommittee to advance H.R. 263. Again, I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to testify today.
Sheriff, thank you very much. We'll next hear from Mr. Carter Vanderwall, who is an irrigator and a member of the Board of Directors for both the North Dakota Irrigation Association and the KEM Electric Cooperative. Mr. Vanderwall, welcome to the committee. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
That would be, I think, KEM. Is that a misprint or?
KEM is what I have. Did we get it right?
KEM.
KEM.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chem Electric. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Hoffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before you here today. My name is Carter Vanderwall, a producer and irrigator in South Central North Dakota. I serve on the Board of Directors for the North Dakota Irrigation Association and on the board of my local electric cooperative. I'm proud to be here in support of H.R. 3081, critical legislation needed to advance irrigation in the state of North Dakota and fulfill a promise made to the people of North Dakota nearly 80 years ago. The history and progress in North Dakota has long been tied to water. The Missouri River has always played an important role in the state, particularly since the Flood Control Act of 1944. This consequential piece of legislation forever changed the landscape of North Dakota. In all, the state of North Dakota lost 584,060 acres of land, much of it prime farmland, when the river was dammed at Garrison and Oahe. The creation of the lakes behind the dams pushed producers from fertile lowlands where access to water was relatively easy to higher ground where access was more difficult and costly. Recognizing this reality, the federal government offered reduced rate power, known as project pumping power, to offset the increased costs associated with relocating irrigation to higher ground. Project pumping power is a critical benefit, making irrigation in parts of North Dakota a possibility. Project pumping power is not all applied to the power used by an irrigator, but simply to what is referred to as first lift power, that power that is needed to get water from the river to the field. Since 1944, the federal government and the state of North Dakota have renegotiated the various federal benefits that the state receives in compensation for the building of the dam system along the river, including the acres eligible for project pumping power. The most recent renegotiation was codified in the Dakota Water Resources Act of 2000, also known as the DWRA. The Dakota Water Resources Act authorized project pumping power for specific areas in the state, including the McCluskey Canal, an important irrigation water source built as part of the 1944 Flood Control Act. The Dakota Water Resources Act also authorized the availability of project pumping power for up to 28,000 acres outside of the designated areas. Those undesignated acres, according to the Dakota Water Resources Act and the Bureau of Reclamation, would be treated as federally authorized projects and therefore eligible for project pumping power, although not developed by the federal government. Unfortunately, while implementing the Dakota Water Resources Act, the Department of the Interior felt the language regarding the 28,000 undesignated acres was not clear enough to provide project pumping power to those undesignated areas. The legislation you have before you today would provide the administration the clarity it needs to provide project pumping power to additional irrigators in North Dakota up to 28,000 acres, as was envisioned by Congress. Access to project pumping power for those 28,000 acres will make a concrete difference for the people of North Dakota. There are irrigators, some of whom are my neighbors, whose families have been farming along the river for decades, families who saw parts of their farms disappear underwater after the dams were built. They have been waiting for their promised access to project pumping power since the 1950s. Access to this benefit could reduce their irrigation power bill significantly. The Irrigation Association conservatively estimates that access to project pumping power reduces an irrigator's power bill by 30%. This benefit could go a long way to making their operations profitable as irrigators today and for future generations. As the North Dakota Irrigation Association, we are actively looking for ways to increase viability for irrigation across the state. While not a silver bullet, passage of H.R. 3081 will increase viability of irrigation, both current and the potential along the Missouri River. It also brings a long-awaited promise to many producers up and down the river who saw their operations change dramatically due to the Flood Control Act of 1944. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I thank you again for your time today and respectfully ask for your favorable consideration of H.R. 3081.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderwall. The committee will now hear testimony from Mr. Erling Jewell, who is the district manager for the Greenfields Irrigation District in Fairfield, Montana. Mr. Jewell, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Huffman and distinguished subcommittee members. I'd also like to thank Representative Matt Rosendale for his tenacity and persistence with respect to H.R. 6369. Good afternoon. My name is Erling Jewell, and I am the manager for the Greenfields Irrigation District located in north central Montana. I am testifying today in support of H.R. 6369, which would authorize the Secretary of Interior to amend the project authorization for Reclamation's Sun River project to include hydroelectric power generation. This authorization amendment is important to the irrigation district as it would correct a deficiency that has existed since the 1920s. This bill would facilitate and expedite the district's efforts to develop hydropower generation on the existing Gibson Dam, which is a critical component of GID's irrigation infrastructure. In 1905, the congressional authorization for the Sun River project was for a single-purpose project, that being irrigation. In the mid-1920s, the Gibson Dam and storage reservoir was constructed for the district as part of the project. Built between 1926 and 1929, the design for Gibson Dam included provisions for hydropower generation, and consequently, power penstocks were incorporated into the dam during construction. Unfortunately, after the dam was constructed, Reclamation did not amend the original Sun River project authorization to reflect this new and additional capacity afforded to the district. Amending the project authorization to include hydropower generation on an existing Reclamation-owned dam would permit Reclamation to act as the authorizing entity for such hydropower development. The authorization amendment will also enable the district to achieve its long-standing efforts and desire for such hydropower generation. The district is fully responsible for the operation and maintenance of Gibson Dam because GID is a transferred works project with Reclamation. In fact, since its inception, GID has been 100% responsible for all the maintenance costs for all the Reclamation-owned irrigation infrastructure comprising the district. This financial responsibility also extends to the eventual costs required to replace this aging infrastructure. The looming costs to overhaul the district infrastructure is the biggest challenge facing GID water users. The cost to replace the district's aging infrastructure is estimated to be between $80 and $95 million. This financial burden cannot be borne on the backs of the local farmers and ranchers. Besides producing clean, green, reliable, renewable energy and promoting America's energy independence, the irrigation district will realize a revenue stream from the generation of electricity. This revenue is critically important to the district. The source of income will allow GID to modernize, overhaul, and replace its 100-year-old irrigation infrastructure. The revenue stream will permit the district to be self-reliant and self-funded with respect to these future irrigation replacement projects. An added benefit to overhauling and modernizing the district is the ability to maximize water conservation and water management efficiency. Again, I ask that this subcommittee pass a support passage of H.R. 6369 as it would correct a 100-year-old deficiency that should have been addressed when Gibson Dam was constructed with provisions for hydropower generation, thus expanding the district's capacity beyond that of simple irrigation. Also, passage of this bill will empower Reclamation as the licensing authority for the hydropower development on this Reclamation-owned dam to allow generation of clean, reliable energy by the irrigation district, and the district would then use this revenue stream to fund the plus $80 million in infrastructure replacement projects necessary to ensure the district's viability for future generations of agricultural producers. With that, I encourage the subcommittee to again support H.R. 6369. And thank you again for the time to speak today, Chair Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Jewell. We'll bring it back to the members for questions, and I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Sheriff Lutz, are you still with us? Let me start by...
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff. Let me start by apologizing. I think I was mispronouncing your last name, but it is Sheriff...
That's fine.
Sheriff Lutz, and I want to ask you why current federal law is not adequate to protect the public from the kind of situation you unfortunately had to encounter. My understanding is that there's currently an exemption for entities registered with the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, in the Captive Wildlife Safety Act. Why is that not enough to protect people from these situations?
Well, Senator Huffman, thank you, Representative Huffman, thank you for the question. And I don't have all the answers as far as what's actually in that legislation or what that covers. I can tell you why we need a federal act is because of the situation in Ohio. There's a lot of states that still don't have that. And so when we enacted our legislation, it put some restrictions in place that allowed for us to be able to do things. And the one you're talking about, I don't think prohibits pet ownership. And so in our situation, we had a lot of things where we didn't even know what this owner had. So the legislation that we have now puts permits in place, puts inventory list in place. And again, I think because of this trade, the criminal element has no concept of borders, of state borders, even down to county borders. And so that's why there needs to be something in place, at least for these states that don't have their own legislation.
Yeah, you talked about not even knowing, who has these cats. There may be some people who think, well, if law enforcement is not prepared to respond to these situations, maybe we should just equip them with tranquilizers and other things like that. Why is it more complicated than that, Sheriff?
Yeah, great question. And it's been over 10 years now that we faced those questions as well. And look, law enforcement is tasked to the limit now. We have so many things that we have to train our people on. We have so many things that we're asked to prepare for. And really, the first responders, the frontline people, we're the ones that get those calls. And so we just don't have the ability to take on the extra that would be, just the knowledge of how to deal with these animals that should be left up to veterinarians or left up to all these people that are qualified to have these, not people that are keeping them in their backyard. And so the resources to start with, the knowledge, the ability, and none of that would be present for us to be able to take on, just like we didn't have the ability to do that back when we had our incident.
Right. As bad as that scene was that you described, and it's got to be something that haunts you and your officers, it sounds like it could have been a lot worse for the community that you serve.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate that question. We were very fortunate. I've said many times we were very lucky. Our incident started because of a neighbor that had lived beside this property, several neighbors, but the two neighbors that lived exactly beside it were very familiar with it. I was very familiar with it. But them calling when they've seen the first couple animals out got our people there very quickly. And because it was still daylight hours, we were able to see what was in front of us. And so without that phone call, without those neighbors getting us there and our people doing what they did, kind of surrounding the area, that would have been huge. And it's still very miraculous today that we had no injuries from that incident that day.
Remarkable. Thanks very much, Sheriff. I will yield back and recognize Ranking Member Bentz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Sheriff, just to continue with you for just a moment, I'm from the state of Oregon. My brother, I've got 5 younger brothers. One of them was the county sheriff for many years. So I really appreciate and respect the work county sheriffs do.
Thank you, sir.
So we also have in Oregon a ban on using dogs to hunt big cats. And I'm just curious, in your space, if you have to go find a big cat, how do you use dogs?
Ranking Member Bentz, I've never been asked to do that in my 33 years in law enforcement. We've never had to go search for any types of these animals. I can tell you a very quick story. The day of our incident, it went into the next day. We had some rain overnight, and we were told by a lot of the professionals that because the storm had come in, if there were any animals still loose, they would probably bed down. The next morning, we heard a large cat. I can't remember if it was a Bengal tiger or the lion, but it was a large cat in a neighboring tree grove from where we were dealing with this problem. Because we had a vet, because we had some experts on the scene, because we had some tranquilizers, because we had plenty of people, we actually tried to approach that cat to tranquilize it. We didn't have to use a dog. We knew where this one was at. But when the vet hit that cat with a tranquilizer, you heard the cat, and then the cat responded by coming out of the woods at the vet who shot that, and we had to put it down. So just to see that kind of that kind of animal coming at you and that reaction just kind of verified what we did. And I would hate to be anywhere with a dog trying to find one of these animals.
Right. I'll just share with you, Sheriff, that in my state, there's been a ban on hunting cougars, and as a result, we are, I hate to say inundated, but we have way too many, and in fact, they're starting to creep into spaces where children play. And the question really is, when you have large forested areas of the millions of acres, how in the world do you control big cats when you don't have dogs? Because I guarantee you, individuals cannot go find those creatures without the help of a dog. But moving on, Mr. Vanderwall, the Bureau of Reclamation's testimony on H.R. 3081 stated the bill will increase power rates to other power customers, such as the rural electric cooperatives who receive Pick-Sloan power. But your testimony notes that the North Dakota rural electric co-ops support this legislation. Why is this bill supported by the co-ops when the Bureau of Reclamation says they will pay higher rates because of this bill?
Thank you, Ranking Member. That's a good question, because we talked it over a few years ago. I brought a bill to the North Dakota Association of RECs, and it was passed. And at that time, I had been to a meeting out with Western Power, WAPA, out in Denver. And at that time, the administrator said that there is power available, and that, as probably as well as I do, is through the years, co-ops and other members, at least our co-op was included, you lose a portion of your WAPA power for other entities that as the years go by come up and are in need of that power. And where they say it's going to cost more, the co-ops are going to wheel the power. They're still going to get paid their wheeling fee. But as far as the power itself, it's supposed to come at cost from generation on the dams.
Right, and if I recall correctly from previous hearings, we're going to need something like twice as much power as we currently have. And so having this additional source, of course, makes absolute sense. I'm going to shift to Mr. Jewell at the risk of robbing Congressman Rosendale of this question. Mr. Jewell, the bill you're testifying on would authorize hydropower development at the Gibson Dam. The bill does not make it clear who would develop the hydropower, specifically the Bureau of Rec or a non-federal entity such as your irrigation district. The Bureau of Rec was unable to provide testimony on this bill, so I will ask you this question. Do you plan to use the lease of power privilege so you develop the hydropower and pay a fee to the federal government for hydropower generation as opposed to the Bureau of Rec directly building the facility?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It is our goal as the partner with Reclamation, operating and responsible for the maintenance of that dam, that the irrigation district would be the entity to develop hydropower and for that project. It is not necessarily spelled out in the bill, although with the lease of power privilege, the first right of refusal with respect to development on reclamation-owned facilities does go to the district that is responsible and benefits directly from those operations. If that partner chooses not to exercise that option, then it would go out to whoever Reclamation selected via a proposal purpose. And that is my understanding of the lease of power privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Rosendale for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jewell, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really do appreciate that, and to talk about this very important piece of legislation. As you know, the Sun River Hydropower Authorization Act would help bring Greenfields Irrigation District a step closer to generating hydroelectric power at the Gibson Dam. I received a ton of letters supporting this bill from state legislator, county commissioners, electric co-ops, and more. Can you expand, please, for us how this bill will benefit not just the irrigation district, but also the local community there?
Right. Well, and thank you, Representative Rosendale, for your efforts on this this legislation. But you're correct. I mean, there are many entities that would benefit from this project. I think directly, obviously, the production of green energy is something that everybody would benefit from. In our state, we need to look at more sources, more diversification in a well-developed portfolio of energy production. The local jobs from this construction obviously would be tremendous over a short period of time, but then this would also create the opportunity for 2 more full-time positions to manage the hydroelectric project and the related infrastructure. It would benefit the Sun River Electric Co-op as they would wheel the energy outside of the area to whoever buyer would ultimately be determined. But as you mentioned, I think Reclamation would benefit because the revenue that's generated would allow the district to modernize and replace a lot of the aging infrastructure owned by Reclamation, although we are ultimately responsible anyway as the irrigation district and the water users. It would be a lot easier if we had the funds to do that in a more timely manner than responding to mid-season catastrophic failures because we're not able to keep up with the collapse of our aging infrastructure. There's other entities that could be benefiting from this. We are looking at the possibility of supplementing in-stream flows with some of the water savings that we will realize as we modernize and overhaul our 100-year-old infrastructure. With that conservation benefits, that will allow us to leave more water in the river for in-stream flows during those hot, dry summer months that are particularly stressful for the local fisheries and benefit that and recreational. So yeah, there's many benefits for this project, both in the short term and in the long term.
And
Thank you for the question.
Really appreciate you talking about the in-stream flows, because I don't think that a lot of people understand just how important that is, especially out in Montana where we get those long hot summers and the runoff from the snowpack, starts diminishing, and all of a sudden this in-stream flows end up dropping dramatically, which hurts our fisheries. It has all kinds of cascading effects. And I had that as my next question, as a matter of fact, because the facility was constructed in the 20s. Clearly, the delivery systems have improved dramatically. Do you anticipate any water savings from the additional conservation measures and the new delivery methods, such as just putting some of this delivery in enclosed pipe that the upgrades will provide?
Yes, exactly. Our water right precludes us from irrigating more than our 83,000+ acres. So we only need so much water to do that. Unfortunately, our 100-year-old system was built for flood-style irrigation, rotational flood head. And today, over 70% of our producers are using pump systems with wheel lines and pivots. And that's a drastically different delivery system that our system was not designed for. And as we modernize our district to accommodate the way the water is being utilized today, that will result in a water savings. And since we can't irrigate more ground, that extra water, which we technically wouldn't need, would stay in the reservoir and then supplement, as I mentioned, those summer flows, which are very critical.
Have you done any kind of rough calculation on how much water savings that is, Erling?
No, I haven't, but we are working on an infrastructure overhaul management plan that will do just that, actually, and give us a little more, I guess, value when we're going after some of these grants that we're looking for.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The member, let me thank the witnesses, all of our witnesses and the members for their engagement. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for our witnesses. We will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the record will be held open for 10 business days to allow for responses. If there's no further business before the subcommittee, hearing none, then without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thanks.